Welcome to the Triage Method podcast, Thursday edition, where we will
No,
touch
no,
on.
no. This is going to be a Monday edition.
Oh, this is the Monday. Excuse me.
So weak, Gary.
Yeah, so this is the Monday edition, but regardless, we're still going to be answering a question. Okay, so it's going to be a question based podcast, and that question is Patrick,
I don't know, Gary.
you're the
No, the
question.
question was actually a question that I got on Instagram. Well, it was more. I'm not even going to say a question. It was more of a. I don't even know what the terminology is. It was basically they wanted to know if their approach was correct, right? And it was actually really funny because I was actually talking to someone else in the gym that I train in earlier in the week about that same topic. They were saying like, "Oh, I have to wait X amount of time to do this thing before I can do this other thing," which we'll get to. And they were basically in my Instagram DMs. They were just kind of going, "Oh, is this the best approach?" Because they're setting up their kind of diet, fat loss, all that kind of stuff for the new year, right? And effectively, the topic we're going to discuss is two factors here, right? First of all, it's should I lose fat first and then focus on muscle building, right? And then also, should I do mainly cardio first and then focus on doing the weights, the weights. Um, so they're the kind of two topics, right? Or the two parts to this question, because both of those individuals were under the assumption that they should, first of all, focus on fat loss. So they have some fat to lose, whatever it is, 10, 15 kilos, whatever. And they both were suggesting that to get the body that they want, to get the physique that they want, to get the health outcomes, performance outcomes, etc., everything that they wanted, that they have to lose fat first, and then they can start building muscle. And that the way they were going to go about it was to mainly do cardio first, maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 sessions per week. And then once they got down their body fat to quote unquote acceptable level for them, then they can start focusing on building muscle, right? And that's what we're going to discuss it on this podcast, because there's a few topics that kind of intertwine, and you can start piecing things together once you understand these things. But Gary, what are your initial thoughts on that whole concept? Well, those two concepts there.
Yeah, so I think as we've discussed before, like in general, I think we try to avoid looking at exercise as being purely a fat loss tool. I think it's often doomed to fail when you start to do that. Okay, it can and it definitely should be part of the picture, and I would definitely be a proponent of that. There are people on the other side of the spectrum who'll say exercise for fat loss, man, don't waste your time. It's all diet. And I think that is quite short sighted as well. Okay. But in this case, we've got the kind of typical approach that a lot of people take. They think of exercise as being a fat loss tool, and then they're trying to decipher, right, what mode of exercise should I do? How much should I do to optimize my fat loss outcomes? And the reason I don't think that is a great approach is because, like, firstly, fat loss is a somewhat long-term outcome. So especially if you're that type of person that's looking to lose 10 to 15 kilos, your main concern is how can I sustain whatever approach I'm trying to run with for the long term. Okay, so let's say it was 10 kilos you wanted to lose, and you were going to go at a kilo per month. Let's say you were going to go with that, maybe a bit more. You're looking at maybe 6 to 10 months at a fairly common rate of fat loss. So 6 to 10 months is a pretty long period of time to stick with anything, really. So I guess my main concern then is you want there to be a reason for you to go to the gym every day. And if it's just to burn calories, I find that to be a pretty futile goal. Like, I don't think I could get up every day and want to train if my only goal was to burn calories. And the other thing with that is that you're not always guaranteed, if all you're looking at is the exercise mode, you're not always guaranteed to be putting yourself in a calorie deficit. So if we kind of take 2 steps back and remember that, right, what is our goal when we're trying to lose body fat? We're trying to find a way that our energy expenditure can exceed our energy intake so that we're in a deficit of energy and then we can use those body fat stores. If we keep that in our minds, then yeah, it sounds like in theory that doing more exercise would be a really good idea. But one of the interesting things that you kind of see in some of the research, and I've definitely experienced this myself, is that when you're exercising kind of moderate amounts, like most people do, going to the gym a few times a week, doing nothing crazy, you tend to get, a bit of an improvement in your appetite regulation. So this sort of like inverted U-shaped relationship where people who are quite sedentary, they're not great at matching their energy intake with their energy expenditure, and people will definitely find that if you have had a sedentary weekend, you're sitting at home, you're sitting around the house. Um, there's probably multiple factors at play there to explain why maybe you wouldn't be as good at regulating your energy intake. One very simple one, which is kind of behavioral in nature, would just be that, well, if you're sitting around more, there's more times for you to be idle and to be thinking about food and thinking about, should I go and get a snack? In the center of the spectrum, people are a little bit better at regulating their intake. So, people who are training, an hour, 4 to 6 times a week, let's say, it's a relatively moderate amount of exercise, they're going to be a bit better at regulating their exercise. But as you begin to push up further, for example, people are doing multiple hours of exercise, regulating your appetite becomes a little bit more difficult. And sometimes see people overcompensating for the amount of energy that they're burning. And that's something that I would definitely experience. I do some longer runs. So if I go and did that just disconnect?
No, you're all good.
Okay, second. It just disconnected on my end, I think. Right. Um, so that is something that I would definitely have noticed if I do something like a longer run, like anything that is kind of above the 2 hour mark, you're starting to push into 3 hours. If I'm doing that much exercise, and you look at your Garmin app after, and it's like you have burned 1,500 to 2,000 calories. Like my appetite, like you might think that, oh God, it's going to be really easy to lose weight when you do that, but in fact, my appetite tends to definitely compensate, if not overcompensate, for the amount of energy that I've burned. And that somewhat makes sense in that, like, if you're burning a ridiculous amount of energy, there's a pretty large margin of error. If your brain or your nervous system is trying to guess, right, how much energy do we want? And then you're actually doing that in an environment where there's lots of high palatable, calorie dense foods available, you can see how it might become a bit more difficult to be accurate with how much energy you've actually burned. So that's what you should be considering kind of from an appetite perspective, is that if you're not really controlling the nutrition side of things, just working with exercise and just trying to do cardio, it mightn't be a great way of going about things. And the other thing with that as well is that sometimes when people adopt this approach, they start with a certain amount of cardio, and they're just like, right, I'm going to do more, I'm going to do more, I'm going to do more. But again, one of the things that we kind of see there is that as you begin to exercise more, what tends to happen at a certain point is your energy expenditure throughout the rest of the day begins to adjust itself. And again, that's something that you definitely notice when you start to do higher volumes of exercise. Yeah, you're burning more energy during the session, but when you're finished the session, you're on the couch more, you're sitting around more, you're not walking more, you're not fidgeting more, you feel a bit more lethargic overall. So there's lots of processes that you can't necessarily control for. So if you're really banking on that energy expenditure side of the equation, it's probably not going to get you there. And that's not to say that there's not a lot of benefit there, because as we said, exercise, yeah, it increases your energy expenditure. It can help with appetite control. It can help with things like muscle retention and stuff like that. But the main benefit I would be looking for from exercise there is that, you want to find something that you enjoy so you can keep showing up, and you want there to be a benefit that supersedes, it's above the benefit of just burning calories. And that's one of the reasons, it's like, it's not for everyone, but one of the reasons that we often suggest that people engage in weight training, even if their goal is just fat loss, because you're going to retain more muscle, which tends to be predictive of better fat loss outcomes. And there's going to be a process involved that keeps you interested, such as adding weight to the bar every week. And when you begin to focus on those process goals as opposed to solely the outcome, which burning calories is very close to, it starts to become a much more enjoyable process, or at least that's what I've experienced myself and with clients. But I'll let you interject before I go any further. Do you have anything to
No,
add to?
that's all good.
Sweet. So then, like, I guess the other thing that I didn't quite touch on there is that, like, one of the ways that people will bring cardio or any type of exercise into their approach with good intentions, in terms of, like, they got the kind of calories in, calories out thing in mind. They're thinking about that stuff. they start to wonder how many calories am I burning during exercise? And this is where things get like far more difficult to manage, because there's often like quite a bit of inaccuracy in the machines that people use to calculate the number of calories, and you may even be off if you're using different calculations based on heart rate and stuff like that for running or cycling or different modes of activity. And the bigger problem I think that happens there is that as you begin to view exercise as being like, all right, that was 900 calories of exercise, you start to really kind of micromanage things and associate everything you eat with what you do in the gym. And that can be fine. Lots of people do that really well. They're like, right, I burn roughly this amount of calories compared to my normal. This seems like it's more. I'm going to adjust my nutrition, but it's really, really tedious. And what tends to happen there more often than not, from what I've seen, is that when people start to really, really, really worry about how many calories they're burning during exercise and throughout the day, and they start to get real specific day to day, is that they start to develop a bit of I think, harmful relationship with food, where every meal is tied to a given unit of exercise that they've done. And where that becomes a little bit more difficult is when the exercise is not there, because people start to view it as, I'm earning my food by doing my exercise, and if I don't exercise, I'm basically going to have to starve myself because I'm not burning any energy, and I think that can be quite difficult. So that's one of the reasons that I think in general our approach is to like not necessarily try to over calculate exactly how many calories people are burning day to day, but try to get a rough average. What might it be like? Put a plan in place with nutrition so it's roughly around a given level of calories, and then see how things change in the weeks to follow. One of the things that I say to my clients a lot of the time is like, if I give you a step target of 10,000 per day, it doesn't mean you have to be on the button of 10,000 per day. If you got 7,000 on Wednesday, that's fine. You can make up for it at the weekend, and I think getting that sort of average thinking going, thinking about where am I on average over time? Where am I averaging out? I think that can be quite helpful in this case, and including the approach with exercise. Because if you start to think, well, I'm going to start at 30 minutes, then 45, then 60, then you're doing it 7 times per week, then anytime you miss a session, you start to worry, should I eat? What should I eat? Am I allowed to eat? And I think that can become a little bit toxic.
Yeah, so there is like quite a lot
Yeah.
to unpack in this question, because again, this is why we're doing it on this episode rather than the Q&A episode, which should be shorter, which never is. But anyway, I think we need to kind of break this down into some component parts, because you've touched on quite a lot. You've mentioned a lot of things, and for the listeners, for the viewers, that can seem like you've just said a load of things, and they're maybe not able to put them all together fully in their head and reconcile it with what they know about, calories in, calories out, maybe some neuroregulation of appetite stuff, and then obviously, layer it on top of what they're actually trying to achieve in the gym results wise, right? So I think we should break it down. There's essentially 4 parts to this. So the first one is weight loss. So again, like you've touched on, like what is actually driving weight loss? Well, at the end of the day, it is thermodynamics, right? So that is effectively your calories in, your calories out. So as you said, someone could be, coming to this whole conversation with a pretty good understanding of that, they could have a very poor understanding of it as well, but most people will understand that, okay, I need to burn some calories and I need to eat less. They've always been told, move more, eat less. Pretty simplistic advice in theory, at least. In practice, a little bit harder to do, but I think most people understand at this stage that is basically the crux of this whole thing. If you want to lose weight, you need to effectively use more energy than what you're consuming. And again, you can do that purely through diet. You can just reduce your calories a boatload and not increase your activity or whatever, but you then have to eat very little, right? Or you can do, what they're going to suggest to do as well here, do a load of cardio, burn a load of calories, and then you don't have to reduce your overall calorie intake so low. So you can kind of still enjoy your food a little bit more, right? So let's kind of dive a little bit deeper into a few of the issues that kind of crop up with this overall approach. So first of all, we're talking about someone that wants to lose weight first, right? So we obviously are looking at them or coming to this conversation with them with the perspective that this is a first, right? So that then means that there's something else after that that they want to do. So perhaps that's a physique that they have in mind, a goal physique, you know. This is something I always find really helpful. If you're a coach listening to this, this is something I find really helpful with coaching other individuals, is actually asking them to send you pictures of a goal physique, you know. Now obviously that allows you to see a lot of things. First of all, it allows you to see if they are being somewhat realistic with their goals, right? Especially if you attach some sort of timeline to it. Like if someone is coming to you and they have literally no muscle whatsoever, it's a guy, right? And they're like, oh, they show you a picture of fucking Ronnie Coleman and they're like, I want this in 6 months. You're like, okay, well, first of all, you're white. Second of all, you know, there's a lot of drugs involved here, and 6 months is a completely unrealistic time frame. Like he didn't build that muscle in that time frame, you know. So I find that really beneficial. Just getting a picture from this individual and going, asking them like, this is what you want to achieve, or some sort of look like this. Obviously, everyone's an individual, different muscle insertions, etc. You know. But you're like, this is the kind of physique that you're looking to achieve, you know? And then obviously you can talk them through that and go, okay, so this is what you would have to do to achieve that. This is realistic in this time frame, or this is unrealistic in the time frame you've given. And we obviously have to then layer on, okay, so we're going to aim for this. So I'm telling you, this is a quote unquote realistic time frame for this, but that's for an average responder, right? You could be a very, very poor responder to diet, exercise, whatever. You could be a great responder. You get this results in like half the time, right? And then this is obviously all layering on top of the fact that I'm assuming that you're going to be 100% or as close to 100% on track with whatever recommendations I give you. You know, like if I say this is a 6 month timeline, and that's assuming you're quote unquote 100% on track. Like obviously there's, you know, days that you're over, under, you know, I'm not talking about perfection, but you're pretty much on track with the average being on track, you know. If you're like, oh, well, that's perfect, and then you come into it and you have no nutritional discipline in terms of we give you calories, macronutrients, whatever, and you just don't hit them. It's like, well, then obviously that time frame we've given is unrealistic. It's going to be pushed much further out until we get this dietary adherence down, right? And that's something that you should be thinking of. If you're thinking yourself, like, oh, I want to achieve these results in a certain time frame, you know. Far too many people, and this is one reason we're discussing it on this podcast before we get into the new year madness. Far too many people set themselves up for failure because they try to do something that is already challenging without having built good habits in place, right? And this is something I really like people to do as well, is like spend 4 to 8 weeks, right, just eating that maintenance, right? Just focusing on good eating habits, good exercise habits, good lifestyle habits, right? So you're effectively, like some people call it like prepping to prep in the physique world, but effectively all you're doing is setting good habits in place in a less challenging environment, right? Like think about trying to dial in your food when you're always hungry, right? Because you're in a calorie deficit, right? If you're trying to do that, you're effectively pushing a heavy rock uphill, you know. It's a Sisyphean task, if you will. And that, for most people, sets them up for failure. Like if you've never dieted before, at least successfully, then why are you trying to go balls to the wall, go 10 out of 10 hard from the start, right? You should focus on, okay, this is the calories I need to feel satiated, to feel no hunger, whatever. And I'm just going to focus on nailing down my protein, right? I'm going to focus on actually consistently hitting those calories. You know, I'm going to focus on good meal timing setup, you know, to keep you feeling good, energetic, whatever, throughout the whole day, right? So doing something like that for 4 to 8 weeks, nailing that down, again, good exercise habits, good sleep habits, good stress management, etc. All the stuff that we talk about. Doing that for 4 to 8 weeks sets you up so well. And it's actually perfect because this is something I really recommend people do coming into the new year, right? Because everyone is like, oh, I'm going to lose all the weight, fat loss, fat loss, fat loss. And like, obviously, most people fail within the first month. You know, they buy a gym membership for the year and they literally go for 2 weeks, and the first 2 weeks of January, right? So what I'm saying is, like, save yourself a little bit of the hassle here and just, you know, spend 4 weeks, January and February even as well. It's 4 to 8 weeks and just nail down good habits, good nutrition strategies, good fucking exercise strategies, everything, right? And even if you don't lose any weight, you're in a much better position now. You will lose weight. Well, you maybe not lose weight, but you will potentially lose some fat or build some muscle, especially if you're doing resistance training, etc., whatever. But for most people, that's a much better approach overall, right? So we go back to the individual and they're like, okay, so I'm going to lose this fat first. That's the ultimate goal, right? So if you haven't nailed down these good nutrition habits coming into that, first of all, it's going to be hard for you to lose weight in an effective manner because you don't have these good nutrition habits in place. Not impossible at all, right? Because you could, again, do some sort of calorie deficit. We'll talk about just purely through the diet, right? And you can still get results. However, because you don't have the good habits in place, if we look at it over the long term, there's a higher likelihood of potential failure occurring, right? Scary, what are your thoughts on that so far? So we're just on the aspect of someone has to, or someone quote unquote wants to lose weight first. That's their first target. Not even talking about the exercise side of things. We're just talking about that as their first desire, right? So again, like they obviously have a physique in mind, and potentially that involves more muscle mass, whatever. Especially if it's a guy, they're like, oh, I want to look like a superhero. If it's a woman, potentially they're like, okay, I want bigger glutes, maybe I don't know, more sculpted arms or something, whatever. But potentially it involves building muscle mass, and they're coming to this with the approach, first of all, that I've got to lose the weight. So we won't touch on the exercise component just yet, but that's their first approach. What are your initial thoughts with that?
Yeah, so I guess like when you're thinking about this goal, it is fundamentally a big old body recomposition goal. Like you're like, all right, I'm someone who's a little bit on the softer side, but I also don't have much muscle, and I want to become a chiseled Greek god, kind of thing. That's essentially the goal here. Um, but as you said, there's sort of two different things that are working against each other here. You're trying to initially lose the weight, and then after that you're trying to build up your muscle mass. But I suppose when I'm thinking of this person, I'm thinking of any sort of beginner, I'm thinking, okay, you've actually got some potential here. Okay, so if you are a beginner to resistance training, every stimulus is new, every stimulus is novel, and you're going to have, or you may have, a pretty robust response to that training, even in the absence of perfect conditions. And when I say perfect conditions, I'm alluding to things like over consuming calories. So, generally being in a calorie surplus is what's required for gaining muscle mass, but that's probably a little bit less of a priority when you are that beginner. Not to say that it's not beneficial, it absolutely is. But if you are in a calorie deficit, but you're starting to adopt some of the habits, you were talking about habit development. If you start to adopt some of the habits, such as, eating sufficient protein in your diet is a very simple one. That is a stimulus, when coupled with your resistance training, is going to lead to some degree of muscle mass gain, even if you are in that calorie deficit. So, that's been replicated in multiple studies, even with calorie deficits, I think as much as 40%, which is pretty significant. If you were eating 3,000 calories a day as your maintenance, and you went into a deficit of 40%, what's that? That's a deficit of 1,200 calories. You're talking about being on 1,800 calories and still having some degree of gain in muscle mass while in a pretty large deficit. So it is definitely possible. And I think that's one of the things that people probably, that's not as apparent to people. Because often those of us who talk about these things, we're at least multiple years into training. So for many of us who are putting out information, we're like, oh yeah, that's a stupid idea, body recomposition. You're not going to gain muscle mass in a deficit. But we often forget that the people that we're actually speaking to, the beginners, it actually is kind of a thing for those people. So that'd be my first consideration here, is that if there is an end goal of you eventually gaining muscle, then you would probably be better served to get there sooner, get those benefits right away, rather than going in the opposite direction. And this is one of those cases where I wonder, like, would there be changes in your missions because you've turned yourself into a cardio athlete first? If you do that, you're going to adopt basically the characteristics at the muscle level, at the metabolic level of a cardio based athlete. And if you're trying to go in the opposite direction in the end, like, I'm not sure if that's going to be beneficial. It's probably not going to make much of a difference, but it's just something to ponder. Like,
Yeah, like
why?
you could argue the point from both sides. Be like, okay,
Yeah,
you've built a good aerobic base.
yeah,
You've built a good, like call it cardiovascular base. Maybe you are doing some like hit training or whatever as well. So you've built a good base in terms of your cardiovascular fitness. You just don't have any of those kind of, we'll call them strength qualities. Even though, yeah, strength hypertrophy qualities, whatever you want to call them. But I completely agree with you in terms of like the adaptations are dichotomous. Like you're
like you're
trying
trying.
to be like, again, you look at like, this is a poor analogy and people use it all the time, but like you look at someone who is a marathon runner and you look at someone who like lifts weights, they obviously look different, and again, it's a poor analogy because people self-select to habits or to activities that they're generally built for or good at, and obviously you only ever really look at the people that are at the top, the pinnacle, the top 1%, top 5% or whatever. So obviously if that sport, demands a certain physique, they're the ones that are going to be shown everywhere, like you don't see the person that has completely opposite physique that is shit at that sport as a result. They're not plastered on the walls. um but yeah, that you could argue both sides from that argument from the cardio perspective. I think we should actually just broaden out this question to include the actual whole thing rather than splitting it into 4 parts effectively. We'll just be like, right, so the whole concept of losing fat first and then building muscle. Why is that not the best approach to go for? We'll touch on the training side of things more in depth. But I think we should just look at that from a purely, like, we'll call it a physiological point of view. Like that, why is that not a good approach? Like, do we have to lose fat first to build muscle effectively? And is that a good strategy overall? And then we'll kind of touch on the training side of things. I know you have other stuff to say about what we were just discussing, but continue.
Okay. So yeah, just to on the point we were making, like whether or not doing cardio first is going to be beneficial or not is unclear. As you said, you could argue that being active and being cardiovascularly fit, like if that is your prior, that could be beneficial because you're going to have higher levels of muscle capillarization and things like that. That seems to limit muscle mass in some populations, at least in the elderly. Whether or not that's a thing in young people, I'm not sure. But there you go. So like that, you shouldn't necessarily saying like, right, I'm going to do cardio for a few months so I can build more muscle. It's going to be better or it's going to be worse. It's like, yeah, it probably doesn't matter. But I guess the point we're making is that if the goal is muscle gain, there's not much of a point in going in the opposite direction just to then start weight training once you're at a perfect weight. Like, I don't think there are prerequisites to start weight training as such. I think you'd be far better served to essentially start your weight training, get used to the process, get used to the habits, learn the lifts. Because again, like people always think of nutrition when they think of habits, but training is very much about habits too. You have to develop the habits of getting to the gym, of doing particular exercises in a certain way, and learning basically the standard gym etiquette and standard gym practices. Like, all right, how do I put weights on and off the bar? What's the best maybe working around the gym? How do I actually do a squat? Because those things can take multiple months. And I think that if you're the person who's trying to lose weight, you're going about that process, if you are already competent at lifting weights, you've developed all the things you need to develop, you know what you're doing, by the time you get into that calorie surplus, you're probably going to be in a much better position to actually now start really, putting the boot in and gaining muscle than you would be if you were just kind of flailing around in the gym and finding your way around when you're getting into a calorie surplus. So yeah, there's that.
Just on that, to kind of add to that, effectively, if you choose to do cardio first and do that for, we'll say 6 months, we'll just split it up into a year just to keep it fucking simple. All right, so you choose to do cardio first for 6 months. You're like, I want to lose all this fat first. And then you choose to do weights second for 6 months, right? The issue with that is you effectively have to be a beginner twice then, right? Like, you have to go into it in January as a beginner to cardiovascular training, right? So say you're on your treadmill, your fucking bike, your rower, whatever the fuck, right? So you have to learn all those things. You have to learn how to use those, how to navigate the gym. You're a rank beginner there, right? But if you then go, okay, now 6 months later, I want to start doing some resistance training, you are a beginner again, right? You haven't built all of those habits, that understanding of how the gym equipment works, how the different weights are set up, where to find different things. So you effectively have to be a beginner twice. And this is one of the things that I think is actually the biggest issue with this whole topic, is that people don't like being beginners. Like, people don't like feeling like, oh, I don't know, I'm afraid, I don't know what I'm doing in the gym here, like that kind of puts them off. So why would you expose yourself to that twice intentionally, right? Whereas you could just do it once, rip the fucking plaster off for one time and be like, right, I'm a rank beginner, I haven't been going to the gym, let's learn everything once at the one time, and then expand from there. Anyway, go on.
Yeah. In for that. So yeah, basically, from a training perspective, it does kind of make sense to start your resistance training as soon as you can. And again, like, you can still do your cardio alongside. Like, that's probably one of the things that we should probably make clear, because I think, out of a lot of people in the fitness industry, we're probably like squeezed into the middle in terms of saying like, oh no, you actually should do cardio as well as your weight training. Like, we're not saying you should just do weight training. I think there's been a lot of pushback in recent years, because I think throughout like kind of the 90s and the noughties, there was a big, the cardio thing was really popular. And that's basically what you thought of as, and I say 90s and noughties because I wasn't alive before then, so I don't know what they were talking about. But basically, like, there was a big push about, cardio is all about health. It's all about doing cardio, and cardio is all about weight loss. And that's basically the way that people still kind of think about it. So then in like the last decade or so, it's all like, all right, actually resistance training is really important. And I think sometimes those of us, especially those of us who are basically probably more fond of lifting, it's easy to be like, oh no, it's actually just all about lifting. And you hear things like weight training burns more calories, which isn't really true. And you hear things like you should gain muscle just because it burns so much calories, which again isn't really that true. So we start to kind of make fools out of ourselves by coming up with loads of things to try and justify why people should do what we do, instead of just saying, actually, yeah, there's probably benefits to both, and you can do both. So if you are that person who's trying to start training, you're probably going to get complementary benefits from doing a bit of cardio alongside your resistance training. So it doesn't have to be one or the other. And that's kind of a nice way of meeting in the middle here. Now, when it comes to the process, the losing fat, the diet side of things, you asked, what did you ask me again? You asked me, are there any physiological downsides
Yeah.
to lose? Yeah. So if you're going about weight loss, right, and you're not doing any resistance training alongside it, and you're looking at things purely from a weight loss perspective, then what can end up happening sometimes is that you begin to lose some muscle tissue along the way. And I think that's probably less likely in someone who is exercising anyway, as in, like, the hierarchy would be like, if you're sedentary, you're going to lose the most muscle mass in a deficit. If you're doing some cardiovascular exercise, like, yeah, that's still a stimulus on your muscles to make them stay around. And then weight training is obviously the most potent stimulus to keep muscle hanging around. So anything below that, like, for example, you're just doing loads of cardio, I think you're at a higher risk of losing muscle mass along the way. And there is a minor effect on your actual metabolic rate, purely because a diet, it tends to predict
I'm pretty
more
sure
difficult.
pretty sure that just cut out there. I didn't hear anything there. The last thing I heard from you was the building muscle, like a minor effect on your metabolism from building muscle.
Okay. Um, so yeah, having more muscle, or having more muscle or less muscle, yeah, that is going to have an effect on your metabolic rate. As it is, it's probably a little bit more subtle than a lot of people would think, but it's still there and it's still worth considering. But more important to consider, I think, is what we've seen happen in some studies, where when people lose more muscle during a period of a deficit, like if they have a greater muscle to fat loss ratio for a given amount of weight, then what ends up happening is that it predicts poorer weight loss or weight loss maintenance. So if you're going about weight loss and you're just losing loads of weight, you're losing loads of muscle along the way, and then that might lead to potentially worse weight loss maintenance. Like, the only studies I can recall on that are actually in, obese individuals. I can't remember if they were actually, if there was exercise involved there, but the premise stands that if you are losing more muscle, there's the potential that mightn't be as good for your actual weight loss outcomes. And there's other things that you have to consider as well, in terms of, like, I guess, basic metabolic health concerns. If you lose 10 kilos and you lose less fat and you lose more muscle, then like muscle is a contractile tissue that helps to regulate your metabolism, and having more fat mass is generally a negative thing for your metabolic health, to a certain extent. So I guess you're always pushing things in the wrong direction by seeking more fat and less muscle. That's just generally not a good situation. So in and of itself is good for your health, independent of the aesthetic side of things. So if you're trying to, if you're trying to optimize your health, it's probably a good idea to at least do some resistance training so that you're keeping that muscle around. And then there's the other side of things where if you want to think purely in terms of aesthetics, if you are going about this process where you're just trying to lose weight first, and that's the goal, instead of trying to chase the muscle mass, then you end up with a body composition that is probably less impressive at the end, because you're probably going to lose some degree of muscle mass. You're at least not gaining it, and may have less, muscle glycogen stored in your muscles around your body that might make things look a bit different. So there's multiple things that kind of converge together to leave you with a physique that, yeah, like you've gotten leaner, but you don't have much shape to your physique because you don't really have much muscle mass. And obviously that's dependent on the person, but they'd be some of the initial things that would come to mind. Do you have anything else that you
Yeah,
think is important there?
with that, basically, if you do the approach that these people are suggesting, that do cardio first, lose fat first, and then focus on muscle building and potentially gaining whatever. Effectively, what happens is you end up a smaller version of yourself, right? And like that's fair enough if you are very like overly fat or obese, and you're like, that's just what I want. I don't really care about the look. I just want to lose fat for my overall health. I just want to lose fat because I'm just not happy with the amount of fat I have in my body. It makes me upset, angry, whatever, right? Losing fat, that's perfect. That's fine. That's cool. No qualms with that. But if you're trying to go for a certain look, a certain style to the physique, whatever you want to call it, aesthetics, as you said, then you have to think like, what, like, do you just want to be a smaller version of yourself currently? Because that's what cardio and just full on dieting will get you, right? Yes, you will get fitter. You'll get definitely benefits health wise, aesthetic wise. If you do think a lower fat body is more aesthetic, yeah, you'll get all those. But effectively, you will just look the exact same with less body fat. There's not going to be this dramatic change in your physique. You're not going to look like the superhero that you want to look like, or the model you want to look like, or whatever fucking individual that it is that you want to look like. You're not going to get that physique. You'll just be a smaller version of yourself. And you see this a lot on social media, especially from like female accounts, where they'll effectively talk through the same thing, because this is generally how females interact with the fitness industry overall. This approach that we're kind of talking about. I don't mean that they're doing it wrong. I'm just saying that this is generally the message that, or was at least, put on women beforehand, where it's like, oh, women just do cardio, that you stay in the cardio zone. It's the guys that are down in the weight room, so a lot of women were exposed to the whole fitness industry from a perspective of just fat loss. It's just, cardio, that's what you should do, right? And you see a lot of transformations on social media, where you'll see women who engaged in that. They fully bought into that. They're like, oh yeah, I don't want to do those weights. They'll make me look bulky like a man or whatever. Which is actually a really strange concept, because does that mean that if you don't lift weights, you look like a woman? I don't know. Like, anyway. So they engage with the fitness industry like that at the start, but then they're like, okay, actually I want to build some muscle, I want to build bigger glutes or whatever it is, and then they start lifting weights, and then they get this dramatic transformation, and you see them where they are now, and they'll put up these side-by-side comparisons where it's like, look, this is when I was, just doing cardio, eating less, and they'll effectively be thin, yeah, but they won't have any muscle mass, they won't have any shape to their body, which is what presumably what they were looking for, because then they'll show their after photo, and it's like they're clearly doing like, some heavy weights for them relatively, and they're doing resistance training, and like they built muscle on their legs, their glutes, their upper body. They feel stronger, they're able to do movements, like they're not just a weaker version of themselves, but cardiovascularly fitter. They're strong, and they could still be cardiovascularly fit. So like that's something that you see a lot, especially from females. Whereas for guys, they kind of come into like, oh yeah, lifting weights is macho, fucking we'll get onto lifting them weights, so there is that whole component of it. But effectively, that is how females interact with the fitness industry. And it is a thought process, both male and female, that, you know, losing weight first is the way to go and then building muscle. But like, if you look at it from the perspective of an actual physiological response, like, there's no reason, right? First of all, yes, okay, if you lose weight, you are technically more insulin sensitive, right? So you are able to partition nutrients better. And what I mean by that is, you know, the food that you eat is able to go to the area that you want it to in a better manner, right? And generally that means that the food that you eat doesn't go to fat cells, right? It goes to, you know, muscle cells or organs or whatever, rather than fat cells. So that's a very, very, very brief overview of like insulin sensitivity, right? So yes, losing fat will increase that. It will allow you partition nutrients better, right? So there is that argument, right? So if you lose fat first, it actually does make muscle building that little bit easier. However, you have to also factor in that muscle building is excruciatingly slow, right? Like, it occurs over such a slow time span that the sooner you can start, the better, right? Because think about this, and I think it's 1 kilo is the maximum that's been seen gained in any scientific study, you know, over a month. 1 kilo of actual muscle, lean mass. I think it's lean mass, not even muscle, right? Which is obviously water, glycogen, all that kind of stuff as well, right? So 1 kilo, just think about that. That means that over a year, the maximum, if you are a fucking hyper responder to training, you do everything right, the maximum you could potentially get is 12 kilos, right? Which is pretty fucking dramatic, like, when you actually think about it. But when you see people going like, oh yeah, you should gain like 3 to 5 kilos per month, like, that's obviously not representative of what you can actually gain. And obviously this is all talking about a natural individual. Like, if you are enhanced, you know, you're taking drugs, whatever, there is obviously that potential for extreme or outlier growth. But for most individuals, like, we're talking a kilo. Maybe a beginner, you might get a little bit more, hard to really tell. But again, 1 kilo, right? So think about that. If you spend 6 months losing weight, right, not resistance training, not training your muscles, you know, not doing any of that kind of stuff, you then have taken away 6 potential kilos of muscle gain from that year, right? So you want a physique that is muscular. You want a physique, again, I'm presuming, you want a physique that looks a certain way, that has a certain amount of muscle. And if you were effectively taking away 6 months of that ability to get there, you've already set yourself back, right? And that's kind of a hard pill to swallow, where you're like, oh shit, my approach over your lifetime potentially didn't lead me to being in my best possible physique, physical, whatever. But it is unfortunately the way it is, right? And obviously over your lifetime, you'll probably be able to catch up, you know. But at the same time, it's like, why would you, if you know this is the goal, this is the physique that I want, this is the look that I want, why would you take time away from that? And this is even more important as a female, because I'm talking about a kilo gain for a guy. Like, a female, we're talking about maybe half of that, maybe, right? Which is fair enough. You maybe don't want to get as big, you don't want to build as much muscle, but still, that's, you already have a slower response. Why would you then make it even slower? You know? So from that kind of perspective, in terms of the actual, we'll call it muscle building, fat loss, yes, you can make an argument that losing fat first does make it ever so slightly easier to gain muscle going forward, because you're more insulin sensitive, you partition nutrients a little bit better. However, fundamentally, you just set yourself back by those 6 months or however long it is, where you're not resistance training, where you're not putting that stimulus on your body to build muscle. Whereas you could do an approach where you lose weight overall still, while also building muscle, right? And as you said, a beginner more likely to be able to do that. And at the very least, like you were saying there, you're not losing muscle, because that can also be the case. You know, not only have you set yourself 6 months back by not engaging in muscle building, not doing any resistance training, you could have actually lost muscle in that 6 months. So now not only are you 6 months behind, you're also 6 months and 3 kilos depleted, you know? So it's like, okay, so you've actually lost muscle in this process. So we have to gain that muscle back, and then we can start building more muscle on top of that, you know? And it lengthens out the whole process. And that's not what you want. Like, yeah, okay, cool. We want to talk about sustainability. We want to talk about the long term. We want to do all that. Cool, that's perfect. But we don't want to make the process excessively long so that you're not seeing any results or not feeling like you're moving towards what you actually want to look like, feel like, perform like at the end. You know, you're just like, oh, well, I wish I had started earlier, right? Is there any other kind of physiological things you see wrong with that approach? Because then we can sort of get on to a little bit more habits and then also training side of things.
No, like I don't think, like at the end of the day, I don't think there's like this is a risky approach. It's not necessarily a risky approach. It's not really gonna go wrong as such. It's just like if your end goal is to get to the point where you want to start building some muscle, I'm like, you should probably start sooner rather than later. Like I suppose like for like I actually can give two shits about how much muscle I have. It's really up to you whether or not that is a priority. So if you're the type of person who's like, I should just want to get into running, like I just want to get into running and I want to lose weight so I can be a better runner, like I can't put forth that many arguments why you shouldn't just, just start doing running, and you don't necessarily have to do weight training. Like again, it might be useful to have a bit more muscle. A lot of runners get benefits from doing some strength training. But in that case, if someone just wants to start running, that's your goal, or you want to start cycling, you want to do triathlons, weight along the way, have at it. It's a perfectly fine approach, and it's important to make that clear because, like, often in the fitness industry, we're collectively very guilty for kind of just assuming everyone wants to just have this end goal of the physique, the kind of male model or female model, fitness model type of physique, and that's certainly not everyone. So if you're the type of person who you just want to be a somewhat endurance athlete of sorts, that's perfectly valid as well. And weight training might help you, but you don't necessarily have to start there. So yeah, and that's all I really have to add, and we can get into some of the habits or the process if you'd like.
Yeah, we'll move into some of the habits now as well. So again, like we think about it, if this is the approach that we're taking, you're like, I want to lose fat first. I want to lose fat and then gain muscle. After I've lost the fat, I'm at a body fat that I'm happy with, then I can start gaining muscle, right? First of all, habit-wise, or we'll call it lifestyle-wise, or whatever you want to call it, the first thing is that initial goal of fat loss, right? It's deceptive, right? Because I always call it the Goldilocks zone, or the no man's land of fat loss. Actually, it's probably the no man's goal of fat, or no man's land of fat loss is probably more applicable to this. But there's effectively a body fat range for both males and females where you effectively just look the same, right? Even if the scales is changing, like your body fat is going down. Yes, you are losing fat. You're doing everything right, but you still just look the exact same. Right? Like the body fat is coming over off your whole body systemically, right? So it's not like it's, oh yeah, it's all come off my abs now and my abs are shredded. It's perfect. No, it's coming off like a little bit off the back of your arms, a little bit off your back, a little bit off your glute, a little bit off your hamstring, a little bit off your calf, a little bit off your cheeks, a little bit off, like it's coming off everywhere, So it's not this dramatic, like, oh, I can really start seeing my muscles now. I can really start seeing, I don't have rolls of fat. I don't have anything. It just comes off slowly across the entire body until you get down to lower body fat levels where you're like, okay, it's really starting to come off the abs now. I'm seeing way more definition here, or insert whatever body part, So that's something that you have to keep in mind across this whole thing, where you could spend those 6 months losing body fat and, like I said, effectively just be a smaller version of yourself, right? So the first kind of thing you have to keep in mind with that is that's actually extremely annoying, right? Extremely off-putting in the long term and the short term, right? Where you feel like you've been working hard for 6 months or however long you're doing it, and you reach your goal weight, but you effectively just look the exact same, just a little bit smaller. You don't have, you haven't moved towards the ultimate look that you want to have achieved, right? So that's extremely off-putting, right? And that unfortunately is why a lot of people fail, because they don't see the point in then, okay, why would I start doing resistance training? I've already put in a load of work and I still feel like I look like shit. I don't look the way I want to, and I've put in all this work. Why would I now put in more work if I'm not going to, I clearly don't respond to this training stuff. I'm never going to achieve what I want to achieve, So that's the first thing you have to consider, that the first defined endpoint is not defined at all, right? Because it's not actually moving you towards what you ultimately want to look like. Yeah, it is moving you towards it because, you know, you're going to have to lose the body fat at some stage, right? But it's not moving you towards the look that you want to achieve, or even potentially even the health outcomes, performance outcomes that you want to achieve, right? So that's the first thing you have to consider, that the end mark for the initial period isn't likely going to be as clearly delineated as you would like to see it, right? Like, say for this, you're a guy, you come from this and you're 20% body fat, like you could spend a couple of weeks, couple of months, whatever, losing 10% body fat, but you get down to that 10% body fat, and most people you see online, you're like, okay, this is what they say is 10% body fat, this is what it looks like, okay, cool, so that's what I'm going to look like. But you get down to that 10% body fat, and because you have literally no muscle mass, right, you are not going to look like that person that is a bodybuilder that is now down at 10% body fat, that you think you're going to have like these shredded abs, these rippling pecs and whatever else. Like, you're not going to look like that. So you, first of all, feel like you failed, that you're not at 10% body fat, even though, you know, you potentially are. And that's just extremely off-putting going forward from that, you know, where you're just like, well, I got down to 10%. Maybe you are measuring it, maybe whatever, even if it is inaccurate, you're still keeping track of it. And now you're kind of thinking like, well, what was the point of doing all that? I didn't build, like, I'm not, I don't look in any way like I want to look. I'm not lean. And you have to get then excessively lean to start seeing more definition, where you're like, okay, I'm going to spend another 3 months trying to lose weight so that I can lose another like 2% body fat. And it's like, okay, cool. Now you look lean, but you just look skinnier. You know, it's like you maybe even lost more muscle mass, you know? So it's like you've actually moved further and further and further away from your ultimate goal, even though you think you are moving towards your goal. So that's the first thing you have to keep in mind, that the end point is so poorly defined that it's likely never going to occur, right? And again, not even that it's pretty defined in your head, like maybe you have a perfect definition and you've listened to us talk about goal setting and whatever else before, but the actual reality of that isn't what you thought it would be in terms of the look, the whatever, right? So that's the first thing. Would you find anything to add to that?
No, just a fatalistic statement. You're never going to be happy with how you look. Such is life, you know. It's grand. Like, I love how I look, but other than that,
Anyway, on that morbid note, um, so that's the first thing you need to keep in mind. You need to keep in mind that, you know, you're probably not going to be happy after those 6 months or whatever it is of just losing fat, you know. And then you're also going to start thinking like, okay, well, why would I engage in more habits, take on all this new stuff? Like we said earlier on, why would I want to effectively become a beginner again, you know, and start resistance training, doing all that kind of stuff, when like I didn't get results the last time. So like I first of all, I feel like I haven't achieved what I wanted to initially. You know, I didn't achieve anything. So what's the point? You know, I'm not going to achieve anything if I start this new thing. Like, I'm a failure, you know? So you already feel like that. And then again, you have to become a beginner again, and you have to learn a whole host of new habits, a whole host of new techniques, a whole host of new information overall. It's really off putting, right? So you're already setting yourself up for failure potentially if you do engage in that style of dieting long term, or whatever you want to call it. So while it's not a bad approach to lose fat, like from a physiological perspective, like we were touching on earlier on, you can make an argument that that's potentially going to help you. You know, you get cardiovascularly fit, you're better at able to exercise, capillarization, etc. Cool. You also are more insulin sensitive. Cool. Maybe potentially easier to build only muscle and not fat, right? You can make all those arguments, right? However, none of those arguments preclude the fact that you could also be resistance training while you are losing fat, right? And that's the key here with this whole argument. You don't have to be one or the other, right? So again, if you think this approach where you're like, I need to lose all the fat first and then build muscle, right? There's no reason why you can't be building some muscle while you are losing fat, right? Especially, as Gary touched on earlier on, as a beginner, right? If you are a beginner to this, you're new to this stuff, it's actually extremely easy to build muscle while losing fat, effectively get that body recomposition, you know. And this is actually really annoying for some people because they effectively stay the same weight but completely change their physique. but because they're only focusing on the scale weight, they're like, oh man, like nothing's happening, as a beginner. Like if this has happened to you 10 years into your career, like you probably just up the dose. Like that's the only way that's happening, so again, as a beginner, like if you are losing fat and gaining muscle, your scales might not change a huge amount. You might see like a kilo here or whatever, right? And that again can be very off-putting, because you're like, I'm doing all this work and nothing's happening. But you look in the mirror and it's like, oh, I'm seeing a little bit of shoulder muscle. Oh, there's a bicep vein there. It's like that. It can be frustrating for a lot of people. And again, this is why, like I suggested earlier on, you do that kind of 4 to 8 week kind of prep to prep, or whatever you want to call it, where you just focus on building good habits, where you're like, okay, I'm just going to eat well, I'm going to eat enough protein, etc. You just nail all those fucking things down, and that then allows you to be like, okay, so yeah, my weight stayed the same, but I saw all this growth in muscle, I saw all this, transformation of my physique. It was great, and then you can be like, okay, now I'm ready to start really focusing on fat loss, or potentially, I've actually been getting good results with this. Let's see if I can push this out a little bit more, push this gaining muscle out a little bit more, and recomping a little bit more. Let's do 12 weeks, let's do 16 weeks. And you're like, okay, now I'm ready to really like diet down, lose some body fat, right? But again, as I was saying, there's no reason why you can't do some resistance training while you are losing the fat, So initiating that both processes at the same time. Yeah, you're probably not going to build as much muscle as you possibly could if you were purely focusing on fat loss. However, you also won't lose as much muscle if you weren't focusing on building muscle, or as if you weren't focusing on building muscle, like you were just purely doing cardio, right? So that's what I would suggest. I would suggest starting both processes at the same time. And again, the actual plan of action that looks like doesn't have to be hugely tilted towards one or the other, right? You could still do a pretty 50-50 split. That could look like, you're doing 3 days of resistance training, 3 days of cardiovascular training, if you want to train 6 days per week, or, 2 days resistance training, 2 days cardiovascular training, like it doesn't have to be one or the other. Or you could set things up where you're like, okay, I know I need to do this amount of overall work, but I'm going to do 4 days resistance training and do some cardio after those days. Like that's generally what we'd recommend. Three to maybe 5, 3 to 4 is generally what I recommend people train, and do some resistance training and some cardiovascular training after that. And if you want to then, really increase the amount of cardio you do, doing it on your off days, we'll call them off days, where you just do a little bit of aerobic work, like low intensity stuff, perfectly fine. Again, contributes to the overall calorie burn. Again, if you want to train more often than that, but again, like the setup of it is somewhat irrelevant. We've discussed that kind of stuff before, but for most individuals, losing fat and then building muscle is not the best approach. Whereas engaging in both at the same time, or engaging in the habits that lead to both of them at the same time, is probably a much better idea for your long-term progress and even your short-term progress. Because again, like you don't run into the issues that you get. Like again, we say that 6-month mark, that was you've 2 twins. One of them is like, I'm going to do the lose fat first and build muscle, and then the other one is going to do this approach that we're suggesting, where it's like, yeah, engage in like the habits, do the resistance training, do the cardiovascular training, and if you match them for calories, so they're still whatever, there's some sort of matching going on. The person who is at the 6-month mark that's purely focused on the fat loss first, yeah, they might look like a smaller version of themselves, but the person that then focused on doing resistance training and losing fat, they're going to have much better muscle mass, at least retention. They're going to have a better physique. They're going to have, already built all these habits. They already know how to resistance train. They know how to push themselves. They already know how, diet fuels performance. They already know like all these things that lead to success, and the end outcome, if they're looking for the look, the person that's been doing both at the same time is much closer to that. Even if they're like, oh, I need to gain 10 kilos of muscle to get where I want. Like obviously that's a lot, but they're like, okay, well, I'm much closer because I can actually see the outline of where I want. It's kind of had this, I have this mold and I just need to start adding to it. Whereas the person that has only been doing cardio and only been doing, fat loss, they're not in that position. They might have lost muscle, like we said. They might actually be further away and now have to do an extra year to get back to catch up with where their twin is after that point, you know? So do you find anything to add to that, young Gary?
No, but how depressing would it be if you did have a twin and they were absolutely jacked and you were just a non-responder to training like us?
I'm not a non-responder to training, Gary. It's just um
Non-responder to resistance training, sorry.
yeah, that's it. No, I'm just skinny. That's all. I like being like this.
Same. I just like being slim. The only reason I don't I don't want to train too hard because I like wearing nice clothes. You know, that's it. It's literally my only concern.
I actually like being skinny fat, to be honest.
Decent.
It's good. Like you've no muscle and you just have a little bit of fat for, padding, like 'cause we do Brazilian jiu-jitsu and stuff, so it's like I need something if I don't have muscle.
Yeah, I basically think of myself like a gladiator. You know, I just like want to be well padded. You know, if anyone ever runs at me with a sword, I want to make sure there's some padding there. But like muscle would just bleed out. Like fuck that.
Exactly. Like it's just common
Stupid
sense.
bodybuilders.
Anyway, right. So then we talk about the actual resistance training or the approach, not the actual approach, the habits and stuff that you build up with doing both at the same time, right? So again, like we said earlier on, you don't want to be a beginner twice. Like it's depressing. You then have to learn a lot of stuff. You're better off just fucking being a beginner once, right? So you actually learn all these habits of training, resistance training and cardiovascular training. Like we're not saying you don't do your cardiovascular training. You can still do that. But if you understand how to use the weight room, you first of all, from a muscle perspective, you have built all of these, we'll call them neurological benefits. You've actually are able to train effectively. You spent the 1 to 3 months learning how to squat. You spent that 1 to 3 months learning how to bench press. You've learned all of those things. And again, like you look at those twins again, where this person, while they were focusing on their fat loss, they were also focusing on skill acquisition because that's what they were doing in the gym. They were gaining the skill of training. Like that person that has lost or only focused on fat loss and cardio now has to go through that skill acquisition again. They have to spend that 1 to 3 months learning how to lift, and again, that potentially means that they're not gaining muscle in that time. Like you may gain some, but you may only be gaining neurological efficiency in that time. I know they always say it's like kind of 6 to 8 weeks, but again, that's an average. You can see people that pick up things like overnight, they're just boom, have that. And you obviously see people that are like pushed out further where it could take them like months on end to fully gain the control, the efficiency in their muscle firing, etc., whatever. So again, like if you focus on that while you're doing another thing where you're like, okay, I'm going to background focus on the skill acquisition while my goal is still, losing fat, you're in a much better position because then when it comes time to really hammering down on gaining muscle, you are already efficient at doing the things that you want to actually accomplish, which is, resistance training. You're able to actually push yourself with those movements because, it's not just a learning experience every time you go to the gym. It's like, oh, actually, I have this movement dialed in, I have it perfect, maybe not lifetime perfect, but it's pretty perfect for where you are now. And now you're just focusing on slowly but surely getting stronger or building more volume or whatever, so from that perspective, it's a much better position to be in when you're just a beginner once and you focus on that skill acquisition, you focus on learning all the habits, and you build to a position where it's like, okay, now I'm actually able to just progressively get stronger and overload overall. What are your thoughts on that so far?
No, I agree. Don't think there's anything I'd change or add.
Wonderful. And then from that as well, you not only just learn, like your body doesn't just learn that, your overall approach to training is in a much better position because you're able to focus on like progressively getting stronger. You're able to focus on, performance overall, not just cardiovascular performance. And you're able to, view training as a stimulus to achieve the goal that you want to achieve. And it's not just a calorie burning experience, because again, like Gary touched on earlier on, the calorie burning experience is a bit of a an annoying concept, right? Because there's so many things that go into it. And again, once you start looking at it, it's just purely calorie burning, like your whole diet, everything else is affected as well. However, it's also extremely hard to track overall, because you do get more efficient at running. Your body gets more efficient at that cardiovascular activity. So potentially, as you are progressing, say you just standardize it, you're doing 500 calories of cardio, your fitness, first of all, is increasing. So you have to increase the intensity to do that, which potentially you're not able to increase the intensity on the equipment that you use, like unless you start sprinting or something, potentially it is impossible, like you can only jog so fast until it starts, actually being running, um, and I was going to say, yeah, so you could be burning less calories even for the same unit of time. And maybe you only have 40 minutes to train before work or whatever, and it's like, okay, well, I can only burn so many calories in that time period. And that's it. That's all I've got, so you effectively become limited by that. Whereas if you're doing resistance training, it's like, okay, well, I can, build so much strength muscle in that time period. And it's effectively, only limited by how hard, or the limit of your genetics effectively, so again, you have to think of, where do you ultimately want to be? What are the habits that are ultimately going to lead you to get to that position? What are the things, whatever you want to call them, that are going to ultimately lead you to that position? Or what are you going to have to do when you're at that position? And then, rather than thinking, okay, I need to lose fat first before I can start that process, you need to come up with, if that is the approach you want to take, you need to come up with reasons why delaying learning all of those things is a more effective approach than just learning them all at the start. Again, like how to train, all the habits around training, all that kind of stuff. Like, you have to come up with a reason why that would be a good idea to delay that. Can you think of any, Gary?
Any what reason to delay learning all the habits?
Any reason why delaying that learning process would be a good thing?
If you enjoy being a beginner, maybe like if you just enjoy the process of starting something new all the time and being shit at it, like I think there's some novelty there, but I would consider that more like a multi-year thing, like, oh yeah, you did weight training for 5 years, you squeezed out like that to be fair, that's a kind of a good argument. Like if you do something for 5 to 10 years and you squeeze out 90 to 99% of the gains you're ever going to get in that department, that's a good time to then move on. I've definitely found that since I initially started with weight training and, just got really, really, really big and really, really strong. When I got my deadlift up to like 300 for 10, once I got to that.
I actually remember that you used to weigh as well. Like, I think it was like 315 pounds, wasn't it? Somewhere
Yeah,
around.
315 pounds. Yeah, when I shredded, obviously. So once I got to that point, then when I took up jogging, that was quite fun as well. But by the time I hit like the 2 hour 30 marathon, I was kind of like, yeah, I'm just going to take up jujitsu now. So I've kind of stopped that as well since I got my brown belts. But we'll see what's next.
Yeah, just for anyone listening for the first time, Gary is none of those things.
None of those things. Not even like 20% towards any of those things.
I would have said 10%, but anyway. Yeah, like you could make an argument for the novelty aspect, but again, like I would rather see people actually achieve their goals first of all, and then they can start talking about novelty. You know?
Yep, I agree. Yeah, no, changing things over the short term just doesn't make a whole pile of sense. Like, yeah, I'm kind of being satire, but yeah, there is something to being a beginner over multiple things over 5 to 10 years. But I mean, give away training 5 to 10 years and then think, oh, maybe I'll add in something else.
Yeah. All right. So I think we've covered a lot. I don't know if we covered everything. It was kind of a bit of an all over one, but I do think it'll hopefully help some people kind of conceptualize these things. However, I do want to also say that losing fat and then building muscle is not necessarily a bad approach overall. If you are engaging in resistance training from the start, like again, if you make sure that you're like, okay, this is the goal physique that I have, this is the ultimate goal that I have, this is what I want to achieve. If you're doing that and you're like, okay, these are all the habits that I need to engage in, or I'm told I need to engage in to achieve that and then maintain that or build on that, then if you start them straight away, you do all those things straight away, and you're still like, okay, well, I'm just unhappy with the way my physique looks. I want to lose some fat. You can still focus on fat loss. That's perfectly fine. That's a valid way to go about things. Lose some fat first and then really focus on muscle building. The real issue becomes when you start delaying the habits you need to either gain or maintain the physique that you actually want. Like if you know resistance training is required for the physique that you want, and you are delaying actually engaging in resistance training, then you are not going to ultimately achieve the physique that you want in a time frame that is likely to be acceptable for encouraging you to continue training. Like we said earlier on, if you are doing that cardio and fat loss for 6 months and you just become a smaller version of yourself, that's kind of discouraging. And then to then layer on top that, oh yeah, you actually have to be a beginner because you haven't learned any of these skills for resistance training. You don't know how to train hard. You don't know how to actually use these machines, these weights. You don't know how to do any of that stuff. You're disappointed in the way your physique looks, and now you then have to go in and go, okay, I'm a rank beginner again. Like you've effectively just made things harder for yourself over the long term. So ultimately, what we would suggest is, yeah, you can still focus on the fat loss. That's perfectly fine. But for most people, what we would suggest is doing some resistance training, doing some cardiovascular training, and effectively treating yourself like you are no different than someone who is an intermediate. Don't think of yourself as a beginner. Think of yourself as a beginner in terms of, okay, I have to learn these skills, these habits, etc. But think of yourself as, okay, what are the people that are somewhat close to the physique that I want? What are they doing? Right. And obviously there's outliers or whatever, but if the vast majority of them are lifting weights, doing a little bit of cardio, sticking to their diet, eating a certain way, whatever it is, it's probably a good idea for you to emulate those results or those habits. That's probably going to lead you to get the results that you actually want to achieve. Now, that's not to say you're going to get everything right or that those people are doing everything right, but if you look at the general concept of what they're doing, it's like, okay, they're applying resistance training, or they're applying resistance tension to their muscles because they want to build muscle, get stronger, then that's probably something that you have to do if that is your goal. Do you have anything else to say on that, Gary, for this person? So again, going back to the very start, if this person is coming to you and they've listened to this and they're still kind of like, okay, I still feel like I need to lose fat and then I can build muscle, what are you saying to them to convince them?
One, if you want to get some short-term results, like as in if you want to be like, yeah, I want to look good sooner rather than later, doing your weight training as soon as possible is probably a good idea. You're at least going to be more satisfied with your initial fat loss. If you initially lose that 10 kilos and you've been weight training, there's going to be some extra muscle there. It's going to make you look a bit better, if that's like purely your intent. From a strength or performance-based perspective, it's going to be pretty nice to not only be losing weight, but also be gaining strength relatively regularly. Like, I mean, there's a lot of pleasure that comes with getting your first 60 kilo bench, getting your first 100 kilo squat. These goals that kind of come early on in your training career. When you start to hit,
That was a 200 kilo bench for you, wasn't it?
well, that took about 6 months. Like, I don't want them to have to wait that long, you know.
All right, fair enough.
But yeah, like, those first little milestones, like, they're some of my fondest memories in the gym. Like, you remember the first time, like, you did your first 60 kilo bench and it was just the worst technique in the world, but you got there and it's a great feeling. And for me, like, when I first started training, that was far more like enjoyable than just thinking about what are the aesthetic outcomes. So obviously that can be a big driver for many people. And in this case, it's obviously a concern. So if you can have wins in multiple different areas, your training adherence is going to be much better, and your adherence to the process long term is going to be much better. Because I think we kind of forget that, sometimes some of us and a lot of people in the, like, quote unquote evidence based community, we often end up on our high horses saying to people, oh no, you must play the long game and have realistic expectations. Whereas when we all got into training, we did not have realistic expectations. Like I thought I was going to be Ronnie Coleman in 2 years. Like that's it. But they're the types of things that make training enjoyable. It's getting into it and being like, yeah, I'm going to get huge. Look at this progress. I'm adding 10 kilos to the bar to the week, too easy, or every week, too easy. And like the types of things that are actually fun. And if you enjoy that process and you take those steps, then you're going to have a pretty fun training experience. So it can be fun as well. So they'd be the main things that I would say. And yeah, all of your advice regarding the specifics definitely stands, and that'd be my advice.
Yeah, I think that is a big thing that is often forgotten, that the enjoyment aspect of training, like it comes in obviously multiple forms, like it could be social aspects, etc., whatever. But one of the things that is really enjoyable, especially if you are doing resistance training and we'll say cardiovascular training, is you can set multiple goals, like resistance training, you can set goals for your chest, you can set goals for your shoulders, you can set goals for your back, your legs, your hamstrings, like whatever it is, you can set a particular goal strength wise for that, volume wise. Maybe you want to do like 140 kilos squat for 20 reps or something. You're like, that's my goal, you can set all these goals, have multiple goals going at the one time, right? Now obviously you don't want to have like multiple conflicting goals, but you can do that. And you can also layer on some cardio goals. You're like, oh, I want to improve my 5k time, I want to improve my resting heart rate, I want to improve my ability to push hard in a 10 to 30 second domain. There's so many ways that you can improve. So if you are focusing purely on one thing, well, yes, you can definitely become a specialist in that. If that's not ultimately where you want to be or what you want to be doing, if you're like, oh, I'm doing cardio because I need to lose fat, and you fucking hate cardio, or you're like, oh, I can't wait to actually, start doing some stuff that's actually going to take me towards my goals, doing resistance training, getting stronger, etc. Like you're following all these individuals online, you're like, oh, they have great physiques and that's what I want to look like, and you're not doing the thing that's ultimately going to get you there. Like in my mind, I'm just like, okay, well, like let's just start doing the thing that's going to get you there sooner rather than later, because ultimately that's going to lead you to the goal sooner rather than later. And that's not to say you jump the gun on everything, but in this conversation, I see no reason why you should focus on doing only cardio first and then doing resistance training. Yes, I can see a reason to be like, I want to focus on fat loss first and then I can focus on muscle building. That's a perfectly valid approach, but you get much better outcomes if you are doing resistance training and cardio while you are dieting down versus the person that only does cardio. They're like, I need to lose the fat first. Again, you don't want to become a beginner twice. In my mind, I'm like, that's one of the biggest issues. And also the big issue is that you're probably going to be disappointed at that halfway mark, where you're like, okay, well, I've lost a lot of fat, but I still haven't happy with my physique. Like, why would you make yourself unhappy twice when you can make yourself unhappy once? Where you're like, I just need to build muscle and lose fat. Why don't you just start doing the two of them at the same time? When, like Gary said, most people are unhappy with their physique anyway. You
And
might
their
as well
life.
be what?
And their life.
Yeah. So you might as well be moving towards what you actually want to achieve at the same time. Like you can build muscle, you can get good at resistance training, get stronger, get all those fucking milestones like Gary was saying, and enjoy the process. Or you can just be like, oh, I need to only lose fat and I'm just going to do cardio. And then, like we were saying earlier on, like the rest of your day, you start doing less activity, you're not burning as much body fat anymore because your overall non-exercise activity thermogenesis is reduced, and ultimately it's just not a great experience. And if you are, like I was saying earlier on, you are someone that's like, I actually want to be an endurance athlete, I want to do a load of running, that's perfectly fine. I would still argue that doing some resistance training is probably a good idea just from an injury prevention or mitigation standpoint, like getting some stronger hamstrings, getting some stronger knees, if you want to call them, like that whole structures all around that, and some stronger hips, getting some strong upper body, like having all those things, it's probably a good thing for sporting activities in general. Anyway, Gary, do you have anything else to add to the conversation, or shall we wrap
I
it up here?
think that's all. G.
Do you want me to just keep talking?
What?
You want me to just keep talking, like?
Пожалуйста, нет, нет.
Anyway, Gary, where can people find us, engage with our services, have fun, do whatever?
You can. Do you know what? Actually, what we need to do is just fucking record me saying this, so I don't have to say it every week like a
So you don't
professional.
say it every week. I say it sometimes. I just have been pushing it off to you because most of the time I'm talking on the podcast these days because you're so distracted with all your studies in all that medical science, all that fake stuff.
Too busy trying to learn the malarial life cycle, which is really so important.
It is
Um,
actually extremely important. Malaria kills a lot of people worldwide. Fuck's sake, eh?
I know 483,000 people a year, man.
Yeah, it's nearly, and I mean nearly the same as alcohol, which is at 3 million. Oh, wait, no, it's not.
The Chad alcohol versus the bird
Disgusting.
area.
Degenerate.
Paddy's coming down for the Triage Christmas party to Cork in 2 weeks, and we're going to get fucked up, man.
No, sir, I do not do that.
I know, I'm joking.
That would,
Anyway,
that would not be
um,
me. And I have 2 weeks of exams in front of that, so not great.
I'm telling you, you're gonna go off the walls, man. You're gonna be finishing your exams. You're gonna be like, man, pass me the whiskey. Anyway, right. If you'd like to engage with our services, you can, of course, join our Facebook community, the Triage Method community on Facebook. You could alternatively subscribe to our newsletter, which I highly recommend that you do. I've got it scheduled for 17 minutes time. Goes out every Sunday morning. So you should get on that. And we send out, like, to be honest, if you don't give a shit about our content, the resources that go in there every week are pretty damn useful because you can just collect them all. They're all there in our resources archive, and you can just have lots of good information to go to every week. We normally give a book recommendation. What was our book recommendation this week to give people an idea? Blah, 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 blah. Oh, it was Letters from a Stoic by Seneca. That was my recommendation for this week. We've got a research paper recommendation that relates to, whether or not flexion is a consideration for lifting and low back pain. We've got an article on average thinking, the crossover between economics and physics, like fucking big, diverse stuff. And of course, we've got Jocko Willink on the Joe Rogan podcast with Tulsi Gabbard, also recommended in that email newsletter. So yeah, we give you a diverse range of things that I don't always necessarily agree with, or we don't necessarily agree with, but I think just being exposed to a wide variety of ideas is good for you as a human. So, there you go. There's that. And also you can, subscribe to us on Facebook if you want, or like us on Facebook, follow us, whatever it is. It's a good way to keep up, but I would just recommend the Facebook community and the newsletter as being the best places to keep up with us. Of course, follow us on Instagram if you'd like. You can follow both me and Paddy on Instagram as well. Like, both of us are back on the gram. Well, I'm not really until next week. When exams are over, we'll both be posting fairly regularly. So that's The Real Paddy Farrell, all one word, or Skinny Gaz, all one word, on the gram. And of course, Triage Method on Instagram and YouTube as well. And both of us are about to finish our exams, which means that we'll be posting way more on all platforms, especially YouTube, because that's where we really want to put out a lot of useful videos for people. So that's Triage Method on YouTube. And we've also got a lot of stuff there that's just archived. There's lots of old videos, such
I'm
as,
pretty sure we have like nearly fucking 400 videos, but anyway.
yeah, like there's the like whatever about the podcast, whatever about the vlogs, we've got a full exercise library there that gives you, our basic kind of ground level generalist guidelines on how to do each of the exercises that one might want to do for different body parts. So that's useful even if you want to share it with family and friends. I've heard of some people doing that where they're like, oh, I was actually getting my brother or sister into the gym and I sent them some of these videos. They're freely accessible. Why not use them? And of course, you can engage with our actual services. Online coaching spaces available one-to-one, and that generally tends to fill up around this time of year. Well, it's actually like on the 28th of December, everyone's like, hey, I want coaching for the new year. So
It's actually really annoying, but it's also understandable. Everyone at this time of year doesn't sign up, right? But then it's like, oh yeah, straight after Christmas I'm going to sign up, right? But you also get this second wave, which is really annoying because like this is why we try to put out content, like to kind of put ourselves out of a job to an extent. But you get this wave of people coming in January where they're like, oh yeah, I need to lose fat, need to fucking transform my life and whatever. And then you also get this wave coming in February, right? And that's generally people that are like, oh yeah, I was trying for the last 4 weeks, but I haven't got any results. I don't know what the fuck I'm doing, so I need some help, And again, it's like, it's understandable why both those two people come in to it. Because again, like, it makes sense. You're like, okay, I'm trying hard, putting in the work in January, and nothing seems to be working. I'm not able to do this. February comes along. You're like, okay, now I need some help. Let's reach out to someone. But yeah, that's why we try to put out information so that people can actually help themselves. And yeah, anyway.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, don't sign up to one-to-one coaching if you don't need it. You know what I mean? Like, obviously, it's beneficial. Like, my college fees are 15 grand a year. It'd be really useful if you signed up. You don't have to. No, in all seriousness, like one-to-one coaching is for some people and it's not for others. And that's regardless of whether you're thinking about signing up with us or other coaches. You know, there's plenty of other useful coaches out there. Like one-to-one coaching is for the person who's like, I have specific goals. I have identified some specific limiting factors and I want to start moving towards that path. Or the person who's just like, look, I really benefit from kind of hands-on information. Tell me what to do. Tell me why we're doing it, and move forward. You know, a lot of people benefit from more hands.
Or on that as well, the accountability. Some people's like, I just need to say to someone, I did this week, you know, even if it's just very hands-off accountability. You know, I think that's one of the underplayed benefits of one-to-one, like just having someone to be accountable. Like I've started doing that with some of my clients that are like finished up with me, just being like, right, so you're going to still check in with me in a month's time, and then maybe 6 weeks after that or something. So there still is some accountability aspect to the whole process, so that when they're off on their own, yeah, they've built up the habits. We've gotten to a place where, you know, we're pretty good with everything, training, nutrition, whatever. But they still know that, okay, at the end of this month, I have to check in and ensure that I'm doing everything right and that everything has been going to plan. And I'm going to do another check in after that. And I've been seeing a lot better long-term results with that. So I think accountability is one of the reasons to also sign up for online coaching. But with that being said, I actually think most people, the majority of people, would benefit from the group coaching, right? It effectively allows you to outsource everything. You don't have to think about it. Like obviously you have to think about actually doing it. You know, obviously you have to think about like your nutrition and whatever else as you're eating. But you're like, okay, I know, here's a plan. I just have to follow the plan and we're good. You know? Like I think that's probably the most beneficial for most people who don't want to be like, let me think about what exact training I should do. It's like, no, here's the plan. You just follow the plan. Just tick the boxes as you go. Boom, cool. Nutrition, cool. Boom, it's done. You know, it's just follow the plan type of deal. If you are someone that's like, oh, well, I want to do stuff myself. I want to be able to, you know, get results myself. I want to learn more, like the templates we have on site. That's probably the place to go. You know, where you're like, okay, cool. I just want to have some sort of template to my resistance training, and I want to have scientific principles, but I want to be in charge myself. I want to be able to chop and change things as I see fit. Templates, 100% way to go. Related to this podcast as well, if people are interested, we do have a beginner's guidebook, you know, so if you're like, okay, it's New Year's, it's whatever, I want to get in shape, I want to do whatever, like get the beginner's guidebook, buy it for someone else, I don't mind, you know, like that's perfectly cool with me. And effectively you have all the information there to get the results that you want in the new year. You know, it is a beginner's guidebook. We talk you through everything you need to know as a beginner. You know, it's pretty comprehensive.
Yep. Yes, sir. I think that's everything, is it? Is that everything?
Yes, it is, Gary.
I guess then that is goodbye.
Don't ever sing on this podcast again.
That's Vidania.
Right. I'm ending this recording, Gary.